Have you ever wondered whether you're being manipulated by what you see on TV or by what you see on social media? Have you ever wondered about the behavioural science that goes into business? The reason why it's so hard to unsubscribe to things but so easy to subscribe? Well, this is the podcast for you. On the podcast today, we have Patrick Fagan. Now, Patrick Fagan is a behavioural scientist and also a data psychologist. My name is Harrison Brown, and this is the Into the Mind podcast. If you're watching or listening, I hope this helps. I normally, before I do podcasts, I try to do as little research as possible, because sometimes what happens is I end up saying things that the people that are listening might not necessarily know. So I suppose I know this, but for everyone that's listening, why don't you explain a little bit about exactly what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So, hello, I'm Patrick. Sometimes I ask people to call me Pat. Please don't do that, though. I don't like it. But the reason I say that is there's this study which found that people who use a shorter name or a nickname are perceived as more cheerful, which I think is where I could potentially use a little help. And so that's the kind of thing I do as an applied behavioral scientist, is take psychological research or theories, but think about how to practically apply them to changing people's behavior. So there's two things I do really. One is research to understand why people do what they do, emotions, behaviors, and so on, using all sorts of techniques, whether it's reaction time testing or facial coding or whatever. And then secondly, actually using that insight to change people's behavior. So I have a foot in academia. I lecture at a couple of universities. I've co-authored and authored some peer-reviewed papers. I've just published one on dark nudges online. So, for example, if you try and cancel your Amazon Prime and it uses all these techniques to try and make it much harder for you. So those kind of deceptive, annoying nudges, I wrote a paper on that. And I've written a couple of books. One is about the psychology of marketing. The other, that was co-published with a journalist called Laura Dodsworth last year, which was a bestseller, was about how to not be nudged and how to not be influenced. But yeah, most of my work has been commercially, like applying this for brands and political campaigns and so on.
So you go over there something quite interesting that I've heard you talk about before, which is this process of brands nudging you to either do something or to manipulate you into not doing something. What would you define a nudge as?
Mm-hmm. So a nudge, it has a specific kind of origin and meaning, which comes from some academics, psychology academics, who were writing about the idea of what they called libertarian paternalism. So paternalism is you think you know what's best for people, which is quite contentious, I think. But for example, getting people to stop smoking or to exercise more, that kind of thing. So that's the paternalism side, but then the libertarian side is not forcing them to do it. So you don't make smoking illegal, but you make the packages blank, or you put disgusting images on, or you hide them behind the counter. So a nudge is basically a way of presenting information or framing it, choices that will get people to make the right choice without forcing them to do it. And so it originally came, as I said, or not originally came, but was originally popularized through governmental and social stuff. Like I said, anti-smoking, pro-exercise, anti-sugar, whatever. But then it's kind of, from the government side, it's become, I think, quite intrusive and overbearing. And then what I do is I use it for commercial gain, which I don't know, might be less ethical. I think it's, for me personally, obviously I'm biased, I think it's less unethical than governmental stuff. But that's what it means basically, is presenting things in a way that change behavior without forcing people.
Is there any groups that wouldn't work on? I'm just thinking in terms of, like, you obviously get some people that are neurodivergent. I've got ADHD, dyslexia myself. Is there any kind of groups or personality types that nudging wouldn't work on as much? I think about people with Asperger's or autism here, because they seem to be a lot more logical in their reasoning and thinking instead of maybe more emotive.
Yeah, well, I think from kind of gut experience, that's the case. but I'm not sure if it's to do with the analytical side, because actually, well, it might be. It might be. It's quite a complex picture, but there's a few kind of more generic personality traits which predict susceptibility to influence and conformity and so on. One of them is systematic thinking, but it's a nuanced picture. If you really over intellectualize things, you can kind of fall down rabbit holes. As Orwell said, there are some things so absurd only an intellectual would believe them. So listening to your gut, being able to listen to your gut, can kind of be a protective factor. There's also a personality trait called agreeableness, and agreeable people are more likely to agree to things, unsurprisingly. And so they're more likely to go along with the crowd or to do what they're told and to be influenced. So on the other hand, disagreeable people who are more cynical, more aloof, and I consider myself disagreeable, so I'm not having a go. And there's nothing wrong with being on either end of the spectrum, but disagreeable people are just more likely to resist things, even to their detriment. There's also, I suppose, what you might call immunity. So people who've been manipulated before, who've seen manipulation, they are more immune to it. They're more likely to spot it. It's less likely to influence them. And also the level of exposure to influence techniques also makes you more vulnerable. So there's a saying in AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, if you hang around in a barber's long enough, sooner or later you'll get your hair cut. So if you are watching TV and using social media and so on, even if you're engaging with it critically, it will still influence you. So those are some of the various factors, I think. Not listening to your gut, being overly kind of compliant and nice and agreeable, and I guess the information that you've been exposed to before and your experiences. These are the main protective factors, I think.
Yeah. And how would a business like, I think of McDonald's as a great example, or maybe like Coca-Cola, these humongous companies that people kind of like, they know that they're bad for them, but they continue to buy them. Like, how do they nudge their customers or their client base to keep going back?
Well, partly it's the product. McDonald's, you eat it in the first, well, I don't anymore, but I used to, and the first few bites were usually disgusting for the first bite, but then all the chemicals kick in, allegedly. And it just becomes kind of addictive to eat. Pringles and Doritos, the same kind of thing. So I'm sure there's things about the product. Coca-Cola is just sugar, which we're hardwired to stuff in our face for evolutionary reasons to survive the winter, all of that stuff. So there's the product, but then there's also the branding and the nudging. And so some of the things they do are create emotional connections with you so that you kind of really feel good about the brand and you crave it. For example, McDonald's very much focus on kids. I remember as a child going to places like McDonald's for birthday parties, or we go there as a treat. So my wife and I are quite outspoken with our son's grandparents, like, please don't take him to McDonald's, like being with you is the treat. And if you take him to McDonald's, then he's going to associate that with treats. Obviously, they have the bright colors, which are stimulating as well. And they use all this branding to create certain emotions, which you connect with the brand and feel good about it. There have been, for example, there was an fMRI study where they found that drinking Coca-Cola not in the branded can, so just in an anonymous can, it activated less of the reward pathways in the brain. So it was less kind of inherently rewarding when the branding's not there. And that's because you have all these experiences with it, but also the advertising. For example, Coca-Cola advertise at Christmas, so you implicitly associate then Coca-Cola with cold, which is good, but also with like happiness and family and relaxation and all the rest of it.
That's super interesting. And you said something prior to that regarding, I believe it was Amazon. And when you go to maybe get a refund or you go to do something that involves them making effort or refunding or customer service related, they'll make you jump through so many more hoops so that you find it more effort. And I actually found this in I was on a flight to Mexico and it got cancelled, and then I needed to get the flight refunded, and it's, oh, well, you need to go through our portal
Yeah.
and submit a
Mhm.
form, and then after you've submit a form, you need to call customer service, and then when after you've, I know, like, you're sitting there thinking, is it actually worth the money? Like the time that's
Yeah.
spent getting the money back, is it actually worth it? Is there any other examples that you can give of companies that make you kind of jump through those hoops in order to make something more difficult, or alternatively make something easier for you? I think Amazon's a great example.
Yeah, absolutely. So that specifically is called roach motel tactics. It's a bit of a gross name, but you know, these traps for cockroaches or mice or whatever, where
Yeah.
it's very easy to get in, but very difficult to get out. And so there's many examples of making things easier for people. That's probably the biggest predictor of brand growth, is something being easy to find and buy, easy to remember, easy to notice and recognize, and so on. So it's all about making it easy. Again, Coca-Cola is a great example. They had a motto of being within an arm's reach of desire, and they pioneered cans of bottles and vending machines and being on planes and all this other stuff, just making it as easy as possible to buy. On the other hand, if you make something difficult, there's actually a word for that, which is a sludge, making something deliberately difficult to do. And that can have potentially good applications. Like there was a study that found that if you put the biscuit basket, the office biscuit basket, like far away from you, you'll eat fewer biscuits. So just making things difficult can be good in a way, but of course also there's these roach motel tactics like Amazon. Something that came to mind is my bank. They make it very difficult to spend my own money, or at least move it out of accounts. I mean, they say it's for fraud reasons. Maybe it is, but every time I want to move a vaguely large number, I have to call and go through hoops. And they also make it very difficult for me to buy crypto with money, which, I don't know, feels deliberate to me. But yeah, tech companies are really quite notorious for that. I remember Zoom as well. If I wanted to cancel, they've changed it now, but not so long ago, you had to call up a number in the US, in US office hours, which didn't include the weekend. Yeah, there's loads of examples.
Yeah. And you said you're into crypto there. I'm guessing you're not too happy at the moment.
Well, maybe I'm being overly optimistic, but I'm quite happy because the price is low. So I'm snatching some up while the
Buying
price is
lots.
low.
I've never really understood crypto. I see that as a kind of like, over COVID, there was this huge boom in obviously cryptocurrency, whatever one you wanted to go for. Bitcoin being, of course, the biggest, but that was kind of a social phenomenon. Like, I feel like people were doing that more because they were bored and they had nothing else to do for their money rather than anything else.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a bandwagon effect.
Mm.
So you think it might be like the Dutch tulips? It's just a bubble, people buying something basically worthless because everyone else is.
Yeah, I think it's just like a trend. Like,
Yeah,
you kind of see it across a lot of industries. Like, an influential person will do something, and then people will just hop on the bandwagon because they can.
yeah, yeah. I don't know. That might be true of fiat currency as well, though. I mean, the jump from gold to pieces of paper must have happened at some point, and it was probably a similar pattern. I don't know. I haven't got all my money in crypto, but just a little bit in case it does explode. This is not financial advice.
Yeah, I know. Just caveat it with that. I've got pals that were really up, like thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds up in the green, and then overnight, I think Elon Musk tweeted something.
Yeah,
This is like a year ago, and just poof, Ethereum, everything just crashed through the roof, or through the floor rather. I've never understood. I've understood crypto, but I've never like. I feel like when you buy something, you should have something physical. Like,
yeah,
if I collect watches, so if I have spare money, I buy a watch that's limited edition,
yeah,
and then I keep it. Whereas having a number on an account isn't physical to me. It's not
yeah.
real. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I heard a saying that the royal family keep all their wealth in land, art, and gold, and I think
Yeah.
that's pretty solid. So I have a bunch of gold. I have a couple of brightenings and some art as well. I think that's
Yeah.
like the best way to store wealth, to be honest.
Yeah. Oh, well, if you're needing another watch, you know where to come.
Yeah, absolutely.
From that kind of like jump, obviously we talked a little bit about COVID there and the kind of the hop over into cryptocurrency and also a lot of other trends. TikTok blew up over COVID. Warzone was a huge thing. Consumer behavior just began to change, and it gravitated more towards online. How are consumers behaving differently now from a kind of behavioral science point of view?
Well, there were certain things that happened from a uh, from a pandemic perspective, which may or may not have been short-lived, but there's something called the behavioral immune system, where essentially where people are exposed to disease or made to think about disease, they have certain predictable behavioral responses. Like, for example, one study looked at the correlation between historic pathogen prevalence, so throughout history, how many diseases have there been, and collectivism in across the world, looking at the country averages. And the more the history of disease, the more collectivist the culture, which I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that either way. But yeah, when there's a threat, especially a disease threat, people become more collectivistic. They also there's a theory called terror management theory where people are scared or where they have a feeling of chaos and uncertainty. They also show predictable behaviors like clinging to nostalgia. And we saw people watching Friends a lot more during lockdown, for example. People also cling to like certain brands, so heritage brands or luxury brands that have been around for a while. There's actually a study that found that when during times of economic crisis, luxury logos become bigger on the clothing because
Wow.
people want to cling to something that's sure and kind of express that certainty as well. So those are maybe the short-lived things, but I do feel like there's still a bit of there's something in the air, socially. I wouldn't say things have calmed down. So there might be still some of these psychological hangovers from that. But as for consumers, obviously, yeah, as you say, much more online. We all remember the Zoom quizzes and so on, but also a lot more work from online. And actually, I have this thing recently where Google tells me it's called visual snow, where I have kind of like a little bit of static in my vision sometimes if I look at something blank like a wall. And I did a Google trend search, and this was basically flat until 2020, and then it's just exploded. So I think screens are even affecting people like physically in terms of posture and eyes and so on, probably not for the better. But yeah, so more on screens, so more looking for technological interaction and convenience, but also very much so looking for like physical experiences and social and face-to-face experiences, because these are much more lacking in our lives now, and we really desperately need them. So there is an opportunity there for brands to go into more experiential marketing, and you're seeing these kind of pop-ups and events and so on, which are feeding into that. More price conscious, but I think that's probably more to do with the economy than lockdowns or anything else.
Yeah, yeah. I suppose there was a thing as well. I suppose it goes maybe more towards the side of conformity. It'd be interesting to get your views on this. I need to be careful with how I kind of say this, but it seems like throughout the pandemic, there was a lack of information to us. And I'm a very logical person, so I always think very logically. Now, when they said to wear a face mask, my kind of, I wore it because it made other people comfortable, but my kind of thing to that was, would you put like a dirty cloth over an open wound? Like probably not. And so it didn't really make much sense to me to wear the face mask, but there seemed to be kind of scaremongering going on amongst the government. By the way, the face masks, the science behind it makes no sense. Like it legitimately does very, very little in terms of actually concealing particles and preventing you from spreading it. It does very little. So what were your views on kind of the conformity that came over the society when it came to COVID?
Yeah, well, I also think that I'm quite logical, and I thought it made absolutely no sense. Like you're still breathing air, right? And
Hmm.
you're just putting something in the way, but you're still breathing the same air as everyone else in the room. And okay, if you're going to say that it stops coughs and sneezes, that's one thing, but the rule was that everyone has to wear one all the time, whether they're symptomatic or not. So to me, it just made no sense. And also being having a foot in academia, as I said, I went on Google Scholar and I looked at the evidence. And, up until and including 2019, there was no evidence that face masks prevent viral transmission. What's very interesting is that in 2020 onwards, there were a bunch of studies then coming out saying, oh, actually, they do. But if you look at those studies, they're rubbish, basically. They use modeling. There was one in Bangladesh that everyone cited. But actually, if you look at the method, what they did was they took some villages and they taught them that COVID exists because they didn't basically have TVs even. That COVID exists, you have to wash your hands and socially distance, wear a face mask. And other villages, they didn't. And they found a very slight difference between these two groups. So there was no good data. And then in 2023, last year, there was a Cochrane review, which is like the gold standard in medicine, and it found that there's no evidence that they work. But it's really interesting psychologically that people, very intelligent people, scientists and academics, kind of post-rationalize or rationalize that face masks work. So then they work backwards from that to find the evidence. So it's like they were made to wear it, their behavior changed, and then they post-rationalize, if I'm wearing it, it must work. So let's do the research and the modeling to prove that it works. Um, and yeah, absolutely, there was a lot of conformity. It was so I never wore one because as I said, I'm disagreeable. So I didn't really care if I made other people uncomfortable. But the pressure was enormous. Like you couldn't go into a shop or anything. Uh, and I was called a granny killer and stuff like this. So the pressure for conformity was huge. But it was basically a top down kind of intervention from the government, and they used all these techniques to make people feel that fear and that and enforce that conformity. There's a quote somewhere from one of these politicians, I can't remember what exactly, but saying that we can rely on the British public to enforce these rules on one another. Um, and they were using all these kind of techniques in these behavioral science techniques in their messaging and their campaigning as well. It was very much a psychological thing. I think the purpose was, or at least the stated purpose was, to make people, it's kind of a physical reminder to people that there was a pandemic. That's a technical concreteness, because if you can't see something, if it doesn't have a physical, I guess it's like you with your watches, if it's abstract, it's not really real and it's less persuasive. Or a politician would have more success talking about a wall than they would actually outlining a complex solution to immigration problems, because a wall is like physical and real. And so I think the masks were meant to do that, make the pandemic physical and real and something people would see visibly every day.
Oh, that's interesting. So it was almost like a reminder to people every day that COVID was real.
Yeah, I think so. And that's something that there have been quotes people have been reported saying. If you want to be really, I don't know if you like to be conspiratorial or not, but there is some research showing, no, there's good research showing that CO2 levels in the blood produce more fear. So if your breathing is slightly hampered, you become more scared. There's some evidence kind of mixed showing that masks increase the level of CO2 because you can't quite breathe properly. So it could be that actually the masks were producing more compliance, but by kind of making people feel a bit more scared.
Yeah, and they're more likely to comply with the next thing the government were to tell if they were complying with the
Yeah,
masks in the first place. It's almost like having, it's almost like putting a frog into boiling water; it will jump straight
yeah,
out. But if you gradually heat the water up, the frog will stay and essentially cook itself alive. So it's that first small step that then begins that process of you conforming with the rest of the lockdowns and the rest of the kind of precautions that they had in place. Is that it?
yeah, absolutely. There's that boiling frog technique. It's called The nudge unit, who are the kind of masters of nudging, they call it radical incrementalism, but just these tiny like steps, what's called the foot in the door technique. Just do one small thing, and people are more likely then to agree to other things further down the line. And then also maybe there's an argument that if you can get people to agree to something and to accept and post-rationalize something that's kind of illogical and doesn't make sense, to be frank, then you've kind of broken them psychologically, and they'll accept anything.
Yeah, and you said something interesting there about the physical, having almost like the physical thing, the physical reminder, and then you said a really interesting thing about building a wall, which reminds me of course, Mr. Trump, and it's really bizarre to me that the American people, just from my personal opinion, think that he is as amazing as they think he is, if that makes sense, because actually, he's done a lot of things that are very, very illegal. If you actually look into the detail, he has been he's been taken to court for it. I mean, he's legitimately done a lot of stuff that is illegal. Now, he did exactly what you're saying, and he said, well, I'm going to build a wall. But what he's also done is he's implemented a strategy on social media where he's going on like Logan Paul's podcast, going on tons of Twitch streamers, streams. Like, he's kind of getting the masses of younger people to love him so that they post about him on social media and reinforce the idea that Trump is the best candidate. Is there a kind of psychological side of that we can see? What are your kind of observations on his strategy?
That's certainly true. He's very media savvy. I would say I think it happens on all sides of the political spectrum, though. I'm not kind of defending or condoning Trump, but I think all politicians do it, and it just happens through different outlets. I mean, the Democrats have Hollywood and all of the media, so if Trump has a few Twitch streamers, I wouldn't kind of begrudge him that. But he's very media savvy. He is. So there was quite a famous book called Propaganda, funnily enough, by Edward Bernays, whose blood relative founded Netflix, but that's another story. And he wrote this book called Propaganda, and he talks about the pyramid model of influence. I guess it's kind of basic if you think about it, but it's about influencing influencers, and then that idea will trickle down and propagate to the people who follow them. So that seems to be what he's doing. He's also kind of using reactance, which is, I guess, reverse psychology, or if you feel like you're being forced to do something, someone's trying to manipulate you or force you, then you rebel against that. So I would say it's not so much a vote for him as much as it's a vote against the establishment, and he's kind of working people up with that kind of rhetoric. I think that's how he energizes his base, is by saying, like, you're under attack, free speech is under attack, etc. Which there's undoubtedly some truth to, but there's some truth to all politicians' arguments, I'm sure. So I'm trying not to be like left or right, or this politician or that politician. I think they all use the same kind of techniques, but they just use them in different ways.
Yeah, and I would kind of agree. I think that. So for example, this year I didn't actually vote because I think that every single politician is utter, they're just full of rubbish, and not one of them can give a clear answer. I don't think they really know what they're doing, actually. I think that they're just maybe being advised, and they're just doing what people say. So I'm quite adverse to, obviously being quite logical, I'm quite adverse to voting if I don't know who I'm going to vote for, because like what's the point? So this year specifically, I didn't. But what I find bizarre about Trump is the fact that one of the reasons that I can identify in my logical brain that he is running for presidency is that he wants to exonerate himself. And I think for some reason people aren't talking about it, and I think it's like the social trend is they're kind of afraid of what the other bigger influencers will say if they say that. Does that make sense? So it's just a bit bizarre to me that like he has that much of an influence on that culture. And then it's also quite interesting what markets he hits in America, because he goes around the typically to put it in a better, there's not really a better way of saying this, but he goes around the typically more poor areas to get their votes, and typically in the poorer areas they're not as educated.
Yeah.
Which is bizarre, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, his running mate J.D. Vance wrote this book. My wife loves that book actually. But it's, yeah, as you may know, it's about his kind of background, and his parents were drug addicts, I think, and he grew up in this kind of hillbilly way. So that pick for me absolutely, I think, fits with what you're saying. That it's he's appealing to poorer, more rural voters, and I think your point is that's funny because Trump is like a billionaire and he's not like them at all, right? But
Yeah,
there's
and also he's going to court because he's been, because of all this monetary issue.
yeah. So I think there's two types of conservatism. There's economic conservatism where richer people, Trump kind of people, don't want to lose their money, so they're kind of anti-tax and so on. But there's also social conservatism, which tends to be poorer people. They might not have any money, but they don't want to lose their culture and their community, and that's partly why they tend to be against immigration and the modern media and so on. So I think with that kind of less affluent, more rural aspect, that's what appeals to them about Trump. Obviously, making America great again, going back to how things used to be, rather than all the change that's happening socially.
Yeah, I suppose. I suppose a lot of it comes down to as well, like the social conformity of a society. You saw this during like I don't know if I was in school at this point. I think it must have been 16, 17 when we were voting to leave the UK. It was the referendum, and the more conservative people are typically very quiet and don't shout as loud as the ones that wanted to leave the UK, that wanted to vote for an independent Scotland. So what you got is tons of people on marches and sticking stickers everywhere and holding up flags that would probably influence a lot of the younger demographic. And what I think it was Nicola Sturgeon in that time, what she did is she opened the independence vote up to younger people at that time, because her agenda was to go independent. So she knew that the louder speaking people would socially impact the kind of the people that were undecided, and they'd get more votes. This is kind of a long way of saying when I think of social conformity, one thing that springs to mind that people are very afraid to talk about is this kind of like woke culture, especially in America. What are your thoughts on that?
On woke?
On the woke kind of
it's
culture?
Quite broad. It's quite a broad question. Well, again, I'm trying to be balanced and say reasonable, noble goals of treating people fairly and not being racist and sexist, etc. All great, good stuff. But it seems to have become something, in my opinion, quite ugly and almost different to those noble goals. And as for why that is, while these movements tend to develop throughout history when times are uncertain and when people, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything, and nature abhors a vacuum. And so if you're not connected to something solid, you're more likely to get swept up with something else. So basic example is military spouses are more likely to join pyramid schemes because they're just moving all the time and they're less connected to like community, etc. So they're more likely to fall for something like that. Or obviously cults or extremist groups go for people who are vulnerable, who have a broken family, etc. So as for woke, we're in very turbulent times at the minute, and I don't want to just pick on woke. You could say the same thing about QAnon, I guess, as well. But we're in very turbulent times, and people are less likely to maybe have jobs because of AI and automation. Notions around family are changing, even notions around gender. People are less religious. People are kind of isolated and atomized because of technology. So they're like interacting with each other less. Also, people are more, I think, if you're using Twitter and social media, you're entering into more of a kind of superficial, fleeting kind of way of thinking. It's like tweets and TikToks and Instagrams. It's all very quick and fast. And that, again, leads to turbulence. It's not grounded. It's not like the mindful practice of reading a book. So people are kind of whipped up into a flurry. And by the way, you can see this in data. I think Jonathan Haidt has a new book, which is kind of about this. But since around 2015, when smartphones became mass adoption, and also when the kind of 9/11 generation, the iPod generation started to come of age, you see all these markers going up. And one of these markers is counts of words like, I think, transgender, white privilege, these kind of things, counts of these words in books on Google Ngram kind of skyrocketed around 2015. So I think that's to do in part with technology, atomizing people and making them in this more like emotional reactive state of mind, but also polarizing people and putting people into bubbles. And so you see this perfectly in the UK now. There's one group of people who think they're under attack from the far right racists, and you have another group of people who think they're under attack from Islamic extremists. And there's no doubt a nugget of truth to both sides, but it's just kind of like what social media does is take these extremes and amplifies them, and makes, it just really amplifies extremes. And I think that's what happened around 2015 is it took these outliers and blew them up into things and made people, again, on both sides feel like they're under attack. And so I think that's where woke has come from, and it's people's need to be part of something. It appeals to a specific mindset of people, I think, who are kind of disenfranchised, maybe in the same way those rural Trump supporters, but people who maybe feel like they don't have the same opportunities in life. Again, might be truth to that, of course, but they're looking for what's the word, like redress. Sorry?
Yeah, our purpose. I think.
Yeah, purpose, definitely.
Yeah, like a purpose. I think that what you said there kind of resonated, that religion's going down, but a lot of the time religion is what gave people purpose. Now, whatever you think of religion from whatever category, it's obviously caused a lot of issues, but it does give people a purpose and a larger thing to aim towards. There's something above you. It's not just you. It gives you perspective. Mm-hmm. And then what you were saying again about the kind of like the kind of reinforcing of these beliefs, it does come down to social media a lot, because social media is almost like a mirrored room. So like you'll go on TikTok and your algorithm will show you what you want to see, because you don't want to see something that you don't agree with. Normally speaking, you might see negative news because that's what people react to naturally, but you want to build that community, and in building that community, you'll find people that agree with your thoughts, right? Mm-hmm. So you might think the earth is flat, so you go on to your TikTok and all of a sudden you have all this proof that the earth is flat, and you can connect with people through that. And that's, the algorithm will just feed you what you want to see. And I think that's kind of developed a thing in society where let's say the left and the right, they're getting further away from each other. They're getting further away from seeing each other's point of view. That might be, it could go across any business. It could go across any race or religion. They're just getting totally further and further and further away from each other due to that mirrored room effect, just reinforcing their own ideologies and not actually looking at the other side.
Yeah, absolutely. I have this book, kind of an odd book, but it's about technology and paganism and witchcraft. It's very interesting, like theory, because these people in Silicon Valley, they love like Lord of the Rings and paganism and so on. They love Burning Man. But anyway, in this book, it talks about how technology connected these outliers and allowed them to kind of collect together and mass together. Would we have furries without the internet, for example? Or there's this meme, I don't know if you've seen it, where it was like, in the past, if you were attracted to toasters, you just be like, oh, I'm an idiot, and forget it. Whereas now you can like Google sex with toaster and find a community, and then you'll do it and get electrocuted and die. So technology it has this strange like alchemical effect where it allows people to mass together, and as you said, that's what religion is. I mean, if you're Christian, you literally go to mass on a Sunday. That's what you do, you mass. And I was writing a book last year where I did one new thing for every week of the year. And one of the things I did was I went to a Just Stop Oil meeting because I wanted to see, what's it all about? Why are they doing this? I thought they were probably getting a bit of an unfair rap in the media. Not that I agree with their methods, but they are hated on a lot. And anyway, it was in a church hall. It was run by a Quaker, and they were talking about they were basically talking very apocalyptic terms of the future and saying it was all because of our greed and consumerism. So it had very religious tones to it. That's not to say they don't have a point about caring about nature and so on, but I think it's this need people have for religion one way or another, whether it's explicitly or not.
Well, I think people have a need for a purpose, and if they don't find their purpose through their job or their family, or maybe they have children, or they will find it somewhere, and it's just a matter of who's going to sweep that up. So exactly. I found my purpose in photography and video, and I found that I was very lucky to have found that when I was quite young because I failed everything else, but that's another story. But if somebody doesn't love what they're doing and have a purpose in what they're doing, at the weekends they will look for an exterior thing. And a lot of my friends, maybe they're not as keen on their jobs and they don't really have a purpose, they'll just start drinking at the weekends. That becomes their thing. They want to be social, they want to have fun. Fair enough, nothing wrong with it, but therein lies the sinister aspect of it. People can utilize that need for a purpose to suck people into the wrong group or to suck people into the wrong way of thinking about things. I was hearing the other day, it was actually my girlfriend that was telling me this, that Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons at the moment in America are using TikTok influencers to recruit other Mormons for the church. Which is just absolutely wild to me. So they're like, it's just bizarre that they're using a form of social media and paying influencers to recruit for their own gain.
Yeah,
it's absolutely odd. And why do you think it is that we're kind of again, psychologically, that we're attracted to more negative news? Like you saw it obviously during COVID's a huge example.
Yeah,
my mum and dad and the family were together and they'd watch the news every night to see if there's any updates. Now, maybe that's a bit of a different example because it was obviously a pandemic. But if you look at the news nowadays, there is not one positive thing that is on the news because nobody clicks.
That's why I don't watch it. I didn't vote either, by the way. I'm the same.
Yeah. Because I just think a lot of it is just misdirection and they don't actually know what they're talking about. Like I had a friend, I don't want to name his name, but he was in Bali and he's a photographer, he's a videographer. He was filming a project for a brand, I won't say the brand, and he by accident was filming and he fell off a river that had a massive kind of drop. Now, really luckily, he cracked his skull and he broke something in his pelvis, but he lived, but he'd knocked himself out. Now, a newspaper got hold of that and said that drunk on drugs teenager, he's not a teenager, by the way, and he wasn't on drugs and he wasn't drinking, he was doing a video project, falls down in a 100-meter waterfall and then cracks his skull and hits a branch on the way down. It's all fabricated. Like none of it's true because the purpose is to get more clicks. So like why do you think that people are so susceptible to being sold negative news?
Well, we have an inherent what's called negativity bias. So we are more sensitive to negative information. So some brain scanning research showed that fear is the strongest emotion It's the most likely to activate the amygdala, which is the kind of emotion center, roughly speaking, of the brain. H.P. Lovecraft said that fear is the oldest and the strongest emotion. I guess he would say that. But yeah, it's a very strong emotion because it has this survival value. And we're what's called loss averse. So we're about twice as sensitive to pain as we are to gain. If you win £50, it feels all right. But if you lose £50, that hurts about twice as much as it feels good to win £50. And this all makes evolutionary sense. And it results in this negativity bias where we're more likely to click on and read things, but not share them, but read on and click things that are negative. And of course, we see this in news all the time. If it bleeds, it leads. And there are other elements as well that make us more likely to click on things like a story or something being unexpected or new. So these are all elements. It sounds like they shoehorn into your friend's incident. And I don't know who's to blame, really, if it's the journalists or the people clicking on it. But it's also part of the same network, I guess. I just wanted to add on your previous point as well that there is a book, I think called The True Believer, that was written just after World War II. And he made a list of all these kind of people who are less likely to fall for totalitarianism. And one of the groups that he said was creative people who have a hobby, basically, and are creative because they have something to fill their time. Whereas bored people are really vulnerable to falling for these kinds of things. Jehovah's Witnesses also, they have gone around funerals preaching from loudspeakers to try and mop up people who are in that kind of broken, empty, purposeless phase of life.
That's
it.
So unethical.
Yeah.
It's like,
I'm definitely not condoning that.
Yeah, like that's just like people are mourning. I'm gonna swoop in and offer them that's like it's like really immoral. Like it's like saying, listen, you can. It's almost like someone that I can't remember the name for them, but they say that they can see ghosts and that they can connect with the. What's the name of that? Do you know?
Like a medium.
Yeah, like a medium. And what they do is they obviously distressed couples that have maybe lost a son or lost a daughter go to a medium and they pretend that they can talk to their son or daughter in the afterlife. It's just really such an immoral thing to do to somebody. It's just it's really, really wrong.
Well, Arthur Conan Doyle, who wrote Sherlock Holmes, is probably the ultimate literary genius when people think of a genius in fiction. His son died in World War One, and then he became big time interested in psychics and seances and everything. So much so he used to be friends with Houdini, but they fell out because Houdini was like, "You're being scammed." And Arthur Conan Doyle obviously was very intelligent, but he still fell for it, probably because he had this kind of need, this emptiness inside that needed filling, even though he was very smart, to one of your earlier points.
Yeah, it's grief does horrible things to us. It's especially a grief that deep, whether it's a son or whether it's a daughter or mum or dad. Family's very close, and it means so much to us that grief can do terrible things, and everybody needs time to process and get over that grief. Which, again, going back to COVID, I think that. Like my gran was in a home during COVID, and she had Alzheimer's, but it wasn't bad. Like it was, she'd forget things now and again. She'd maybe boil the kettle 2 or 3 times by accident. Like it wasn't bad. And then COVID hit, and nobody was allowed to see anybody. And we went back in, and she deteriorated so much, like just totally deteriorated. Yeah. And I think what they did during COVID. And I get it, they were trying to protect people from the virus and all this kind of stuff, but I think they just handled it so wrong. And then the fact that the UK didn't react in more of a negative way to finding out like Boris Johnson was having parties, that Matt Hancock was, cheating on his wife and kissing other girls and doing all this stuff, the fact that the UK didn't react in a more bold way is kind of baffling to me because... for example, I was in Chile and they started having a riot. This was in 2019. they started having a riot, and they seem less likely to conform in other countries than they do in the UK. Is there a reason for that?
I mean, yeah, possibly cultural, of course. But British people, we love to queue and we love rules
Yeah.
and order. So we just, I think people are more likely to think, oh, it's the decent thing to do. Maybe also we're a very old country in the UK. So we might have more of what's called system justification, where we have more trust in our institutions, basically. On the other hand, I suppose America or Canada and Australia, they went absolutely bananas, and they're very new countries, so it probably isn't that. Yeah, it could be to do with high trust societies, or maybe honestly to do with the weather and the climate. When it's hotter, when it's hotter, you feel more irritable and or more how to put this, like lusty when it's hotter. So I guess maybe in countries where it's hotter, people are just more likely to kick off a bit.
Yeah, yeah. It was interesting. Just going back to something you said there, was it you were saying that creative people were less likely to? How was it you put it there?
Creative people were less likely to get swept up in totalitarianism,
Right.
because so one of the things I did last year was I did a whole weekend with no screens at all, and the time absolutely dragged. I was like, oh God, what am I going to do today? So there's just this kind of emptiness, this void inside all of us, and if you don't fill it with a hobby like photography or trains or writing or family, just something, then it will get filled by something else.
So, and did you find that, like, after a week, did you find that you were filling that void of having your phone on with other things, with other hobbies?
Oh yeah, absolutely. The house was 10 times cleaner. I was reading. I'll tell you, actually, I stopped watching TV for a week. I started having dreams again. Yeah, it's just amazing. But then it's so easy. To one of your earlier questions, we just do what's easy. We fall into easy traps. And there's this great book, which I think you might like, called The Denial of Death, which is really about this, everything that we're talking about. People need a purpose, or to become alcoholics or drug addicts to escape from this ever-present anxiety that we have. And for me, when I became anxious or stressed about work or whatever, that's what tripped me up basically and got me back into the screen. So yes, it filled it up with much better things, playing with my son, reading, cleaning, etc. But I just kind of fell back into the habits through stress.
Yeah, and I think that, like, we all gravitate to, I call it kind of like fast food content. Like TikTok, you never come away from a TikTok hole and go, I've learned so much there.
Yeah.
Like, you always come away and
you never come away from Twitter with like a kick in your step. Like, you never feel good afterwards.
yeah, like you always come away and think, wow, I just wasted an hour of my time. But when you do something that's even like remotely difficult, you get a reward from that. And the reward center of your brain is like, I don't know if this is scientific, but to me, it's like a muscle. Like, the more that I did slightly difficult things, the more I wanted to do, because the more rewards you got from them. And especially when it comes to editing, like, I'll edit maybe a cinematic video, one of my own projects, and it takes a very, very long time. I finish it and I get huge satisfaction from that. Whereas if you go on to that fast food rubbish content on TikTok, like, I can't remember the last 20 TikToks I watched, but I can remember the last YouTube video I watched, because I feel like that's more of like a educational tool most of the time if you use it for that. Do you use YouTube for that kind of stuff?
I actually have it blocked on my laptop, but I use it. If I do use it, I use it for longer form podcast kind of content that's a mix of interesting and funny.
Yeah, you're the same as me. Do you think that people actually learn from podcasts? Like, I think back to a lot of the ones that I've listened to, specifically The Diary of a CEO. I think he's good at what he does, but I feel like people listen to him not to implement the changes, but to think that they're doing something good. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's a bit like slacktivism. You know, if you share
Yeah.
something about a charity on Facebook, you're less likely to actually donate.
Yeah, yeah. Do you think that's kind of what's happening there? People feel good listening to this because they think they're being informed, but they're not actually taking any of the information on board.
Yeah, the difference between knowledge and wisdom, I suppose.
Yeah, it's a bit bizarre. I suppose it's that thing again, though. It's like the easiest route possible, and the easiest route possible to do something slightly positive is just to listen to it. Whereas I feel like when I read something or when I write something down, I'm a lot more likely to remember what I've done. If that
Yeah,
does
yeah,
that make
absolutely.
Yeah. How do we like in this age of you've got obviously YouTube, you've got TikTok, you've got Instagram, you've got or Twitter or X, you've got probably three others are going to spring up. How can we stop ourselves being influenced by companies, media outlets, the government, anyone trying to influence us on that? But also, how do we guard? Like, I've not got kids yet. Do you have one child? Did you say?
Yeah, he's two.
Two. So he won't be on his phone yet, hopefully. But how would you stop him or stop us from like being influenced by this on our mobile devices?
Well, with kids, it's a little different. I would just say don't give them one. I know
Mm,
it's easier said than done in practice, but our son watches very little TV. We might watch Bluey once a week if he's had a tough day, for like 20 minutes. But screens, I mean, I think they're like the tobacco of our generation. I think they're causing
mm,
a lot of actually harm in many different ways to all of us, not just kids. Um, Especially shows like Coco Melon, these very quick cut, highly animated shows with all the loud noises. Really not good for kids, I don't think. But for adults, there are certain things you can do. Very similar again, use it less. And I know that's easier said than done, but someone I talked to for the book I co-wrote that came out last year, Free Your Mind, um, I talked to a magician and I asked him, how do you not get tricked by a magician? And he just said, don't go to the circus. So if you don't want to get tricked and manipulated by people online, just use it less. You don't have to stop using it, but you can use that radical incrementalism, that foot in the door on yourself. Can you use it less, half an hour less each day? Can you stop using one of the apps? You don't have to go cold turkey immediately. Secondly, if you can do mindfulness and just live a better lifestyle in general, you'll be more in touch with your emotions and your gut instincts, and be able to spot when something's going on. Some research, a few studies actually have shown that mindfulness meditation reduces susceptibility to cognitive bias, related to that as well. I don't know if there's any research, but I would think if you're exercising, getting out, socializing, eating healthily, you're just going to have more kind of brain power. You're not going to get sucked away by things because you're not really thinking about them. Similarly, in our book, we have a chapter called Watch Out for the Blip, which is about, like I said, you're more likely to join a cult if you just get divorced, but also on a smaller level, you're more likely to be influenced if you're browsing at night or when you're hungry or if you're stressed. Basically, if your defenses are down, you're more vulnerable. So don't kind of have the TV on at midnight as you're falling asleep, because that's when all the messaging will seep into your brain. So try and have your defenses up. And there's also a level of immunization that you can get. So if you learn about these techniques, for example, buying Free Your Mind, available in all good bookshops, you'll be able to better recognize the techniques and you'll be less likely to be influenced by them. But hopefully people will be influenced by that just now and by the book. But
yeah.
those are the main things, I think, really, is like get more in touch with your instincts, be less exposed to them, be able to spot them when they occur. There is one more, but I forget.
It's interesting what you said there regarding obviously don't go on your phone or TV late at night when your defenses are down, because it's more likely you're more susceptible to influence. Because we actually had a neuroscientist on the podcast, and he described this thing that's just super interesting to me. So when you go to sleep, you obviously go through periods of REM sleep. And essentially, that's when your brain recovers. So what happens in your REM sleep is your memories that you've made from the day start getting stored in your long-term memory.
Yeah.
So this starts happening through cycles. So a cycle of sleep might be, I think it's 90 minutes. It's 90-minute cycles, I believe. Don't quote me on that, but I believe it's 90-minute cycles. And what he said is, the way that your brain starts to put things into your long-term memory is actually in the opposite direction to what happened during the day. So it starts at night and then it works its way back to the morning. So he said, so he said, if you want to remember something, and I tried this hack, I think I had an interview like 3 months ago when I had the podcast, and I was like, I'm going to try this. And I wrote tons of stuff down in my book before I went to bed. And just before I went to bed, I read it again, and then put it away. And in the morning, I remembered it.
Interesting.
So like your memories are actually developed, if you want to call it that, the wrong way round. So it's from midnight to back to the morning rather than the other way around, which I thought was just super interesting for the brain's structure. I don't know why it does that, but super interesting, right?
That's very interesting. I mean, there is something called the recency effect, where you're more likely to remember something at the end. If you see a long list of words, you'll remember the last one. That's really interesting. There are some people who are, it's called chronotypes. Some people are night owls, and they like to do things at night. And some people are morning larks. They prefer to get up early and do things in the morning. But it sounds like night owls might kind of have a memory advantage in a way if they're doing things at night before bed. And I know they are more creative, for example.
Really? Would you consider yourself a night owl?
Oh, I used to be. But then I got a bit too creative in life without getting into detail. So I kind of had to be more organized. And I wouldn't say I'm either now. I hate the mornings, but I kind of have to push on.
Yeah, I suppose when you have a kid as well, they kind of keep you to their schedule, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, see, I find that I definitely used to be, at the start of my career, I kind of made it, I don't want to say made a name, but I made a dent in the industry, because what I would do is I would get up at 2 a.m. and then I'd drive to like Glencoe, and then I'd shoot sunrise. So I did this so many times that my body clock was just fucking destroyed. It was just gone. So I definitely became like more of a morning person. But now, because I'm spending more time project led in different countries, I'm turning into more of a night owl again. And I can definitely see the flip starting to happen. Like I start getting really energized at like 11 p.m. and my girlfriend's like, will you shut up? Within business, so I work within a team at Chisholm Hunter, who are the sponsors of the podcast. But within business, how can you become, through nudging and through the kind of more psychological aspect, more of a effective leader?
More effective leader, as a brand, or as a kind of a CEO or a person?
A bit of both. I think that it'd be interesting to know, obviously, from brand perspective. It'd be interesting to know both perspectives, like from a managerial perspective, but then as a brand overall perspective.
Well, as a brand overall perspective, there are a few things. One is how to cut through the noise of the marketplace, how to get noticed, get people to pay attention and remember you as a brand. And one important principle there is something called the brain's bouncer. So if you think of conscious awareness as like a roped off VIP lounge, it's very, very exclusive because you only have so much brain power. You can only consciously, carefully pay attention to so much in the world. But there's a bouncer in your brain that decides what to let into that VIP space. And that bouncer has a VIP list, like surprise. We pay attention to new or surprising or unexpected things. We pay attention to faces, food and sex for evolutionary reasons, movement, personalization. You pay attention if someone says your name, for example. So there are all these things that can help you as a brand cut through the noise and get noticed, because that's really the first and possibly most important step. We can't consider and buy what we don't pay attention to. And also, if we look at something, that makes us like it. We literally like what we see. So that's one thing, is getting noticed, and then getting remembered. Also, by building memory networks in your audience's head through repetition. Lots and lots of advertising, saying the same thing over and over again to get it stuck into people's heads, and also making sure you're connecting the right things to your brand in people's heads. So if you're Coca-Cola, you advertise at Christmas, like I said, because it's cold and social and happy. And so next time people think, oh, I'm going to a party, I want a cold drink, that will trigger Coca-Cola. And then obviously there are nudges that you can use, make your products either popular or scarce, or give people a free gift. These are very basic examples, but these are ways that you can nudge behavior and get them to buy something. And then finally, there's also the psychology of habit formation, because you want people to keep coming back. So this is about making it as easy as possible to buy your product and to find it. It is about making sure you tap into motivations, by which I mean the real psychological, emotional motivations. If someone buys a luxury watch, for example, is that because it gives them a feeling of security, that their money is somewhere safe? Is it for status, to communicate status? Is it to communicate an identity if you have a unique watch that no one else has? So there's these psychological motivations that drive people forward to do the behavior. And then also, if you can kind of reinforce behaviors, giving them some kind of positive feedback or positive emotion every time they buy the product, that will keep them coming back and doing it. So that's very broadly, how you become a leader as a brand, using psychology. As an individual, I would say charisma is very important, and rapport. And there's two elements to that, roughly speaking. One is warmth, and the other is competence. So warmth is being likable, mirroring people's body language, everything in how to win friends and influence people, basically. Use people's names when you talk to them, smile at them with teeth, all that kind of stuff, which I don't do. And then, as you've probably noticed. And then the second one is competence, which is about seeming trustworthy and authoritative. There was even a study that found that CEOs who have a deeper voice, they lead bigger companies and they get paid bigger salaries. Have a deep voice, or one study found using a middle initial, like Patrick P. Fagan, makes people seem more authoritative. So these kind of cues to seem respected. And if you have a doctorate, for example, that helps too, or an impressive CV, all these kind of things. But one thing, I guess, which applies to both brands and people is to also target your approach, because you can't use the same approach with everyone. Social proof, saying something's really popular, or saying the tactic that you're introducing is really popular, that might work on some people, but other people would do the opposite because they don't want to follow the crowd if they're disagreeable or cynical, for example. So you need to target your approach based on your audience. I don't know too much about organizational psychology, so I'm not sure on the leadership front, but those I would say are the two main predictors of kind of trust and credibility, are liking and competence.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that one of the main things that I've kind of learned, especially, I'm still quite young, I'm 26, but I've been kind of within business for almost 10 years probably, is the way that you approach negative conversations with someone.
Yeah.
In like a building way. Like if I were to approach someone and say, this, product on the website it sucks, it's really, really bad, you need to fix it. All of a sudden, they're not going to do as good a job, and they're not going to be motivated. They're probably not going to like me. Whereas if you say, I think you've done an incredible job with the spacing around the image. I think you've done a great job with this. However, what do you think about this? And then they say, oh, well, you're right. Maybe it doesn't look as good as another competitor. they are taking it on themselves to do it rather than you telling them what to do. And
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think that's like a really important point. Like I remember I was in school, I was terrible in school. I failed most of the stuff I did. And a teacher would tell me to do something and I'd just be like, no, like
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah,
just
I'm the
not going to
same.
do that. Yeah. Like I just wouldn't want to do that because, and it was purely out of spite. Like it was purely just because they were telling me to do it. Whereas if a teacher was like, listen, you can do it or you can, and it's totally up to you. All of a sudden I'd be like, oh, okay, you're being nice. Like I'll do it. Yeah, whatever. Did you find that at school? Is there like kind of psychology that goes on amongst younger people that you can identify?
Well, that specifically that you talked about is called the "but you are free" technique. There's quite a lot of research in it, and they found that people are about twice as likely to comply with something if you begin or end with something like, "Oh, it's up to you," or "You'll probably say
Mm.
no, but can you do this?" Because people feel like they have certain autonomy. So maintaining that sense of autonomy is really important for leadership, and I'm sure for schools as well. Um, you can't push a donkey from behind, as the saying goes. But yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for uh, the shit sandwich approach, which sounds a bit like you're using. Start with a compliment. You don't want to put people off and get their backs up, but also it's a bit like Inception. You need to seed the idea in their heads and make them feel like they came to it themselves rather than trying to force them. And that's that autonomy point again. It's the same in magic. Like the magician will say, pick a card, any card. And you have to feel like it's your choice and that you really did pick a card. Otherwise, the trick won't work. Of
Yeah.
course, the card could all be the ace of spades, or it could be stacked a certain way, or the way the magician shuffles it gets the same result every time. But it's the fact that you feel like it was your choice is what makes it work. And it's the same with trying to get people to do something. They can't feel like they're being forced to do it. In schools, I'm not so sure. I don't know that much about the school system yet because my son's only 2. I think kids are a little more pliant. It's not until I don't know. Well, actually no, they're not. No, yeah,
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
And there's one more question that I'm quite interested in terms of like, so is there any difference in behavioral patterns of someone that is more neurodivergent than neurotypical? Is there any identifiable factors that you would see in, let's say, somebody has dyslexia or ADHD or has slight Asperger? Like what is the difference in behavioral science there?
I don't know. I mean, obviously there are psychological differences. I guess that's what
Yeah.
defines the groups. But I suppose, are you asking how that translates into influence and marketing?
Yeah, like would I suppose someone with Asperger's or autism is a lot more logical and considered in their approach to thinking. They kind of think one at a time, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
That's how I've been taught it anyway. I might be kind of slightly wrong there. Someone that has ADHD finds it extremely hard to concentrate, and that's why I think that TikTok is so prevalent amongst people with ADHD because it's the perfect app for them because it's like a constant dopamine hit. And then you have people with dyslexia that naturally are more creative because they've always had to think slightly differently to the rest of the group. Like I can only reference myself here, but when I was younger, I can't spell this word, so I'm going to have to reform the whole sentence just to get round using that word in the sentence because I can't spell it. And that later down the line results in being able to kind of see past things and see across things. So is there any kind of like differences in influencing those people, or can they be influenced, or maybe not as easily?
Well, I'd just say on the TikTok point, correlation is not necessarily causation. I know there's a study that found that people who a non-clinical sample who switched their notifications off on their phone for a week exhibited fewer symptoms of ADHD. So that even though they weren't diagnosed with it, there was like a scale, 1 to 10
Mm.
scale of symptoms, and they became lower once they turned their notifications off on their phone. So TikTok might actually be contributing to that to an extent. But to your point, there are very neurodivergent people, are very heterogeneous group. They're very different, and they have very different kind of traits and characteristics from one another. So I don't know if there's a way to say, like, as a whole, they're
Yeah.
more or less likely to be. And I don't know any research on it. It's a very interesting point. The only thing I know from like anecdotal experience, as you probably gathered, I was quite like vocal and involved in the anti-lockdown stuff at the time, and there was kind of an understanding that autistic people were less likely, or people on the spectrum were less likely to comply, or more likely to be involved in this movement. I don't know if it's the systematic thinking, because like scientists and sages, etc., are very smart and systematic thinkers, I would assume. It might be more, and this is a very sweeping generalization, but people on the spectrum are less like concerned with what other people think. So I think they're less likely to kind of follow the crowd and think about how other people are feeling about whether they wear a mask or not, for example. But more broadly, I don't know. It's a really interesting question. I think I'll have a Google shortly and see what I find.
Absolutely. And is it true that you there was a quote from you that said face masks make you stupid?
Well, I was, yes, yeah. I wrote an article, "Face masks make you stupid." I was making a kind of a clickbaity headline, like the journalists who wrote about your friend. I don't think I did. Well, first of all, I was very passionate, and my emotions were inflamed at the time. I thought that what was happening was absolutely crazy. I still do think that, but I'm less emotional about it now. But my argument was that for various reasons, it can have psychological effects. Like, I think it can prime a kind of shutting up. There's a study with dogs which found that when they wear a muzzle, they go into submissive position. They put their tail between their legs. Although someone on Twitter said, "Oh, because dogs are humans," and I'm like, "Well, you've just invalidated all of Pavlov's research then with your tweet." But yeah, there's some like rough, not that great, but the only studies I could find found that wearing a mask makes people feel more anonymous, and so they're more likely to be disinhibited in their behavior. I also thought maybe the CO2 point, that if you're having less CO2 to your brain, it might not be functioning properly. But I just had this general sense, I suppose, that masks logically don't make sense. And so if you're wearing them, you're not really thinking carefully. But I expressed it in kind of a crude sensationalist way.
Yeah, well, listen, I suppose I suppose the logical way of looking at it makes sense. I think that the issue was the information that was available at the time, and the government didn't actually know. They didn't have a clue. Like, you saw Matt Hancock saying certain things, and then he got questioned, and he was like, I don't know, like I've got literally no idea. I spoke to someone, I can't remember who it was, and they were saying that there was actually no. I think it was the DNA. The forensic scientist that dealt with Princess Diana's DNA information. He was on the podcast. Incredible guy. And he was saying that within the government at the time, I can't remember the word he used, but there was no people that were qualified for the job of giving the advice on the epidemic. What was it called? The epidemia or something like that? They're qualified in epidemics or viral, pathogens. I can't really remember, but that's what he was saying. So they were being advised of people that didn't really know what they were talking about, and then they themselves,
and mostly by behavioural scientists as well, actually.
Yeah. So older people probably took that information at face value, as they should, because your government should not lie to you, and it shouldn't be spreading misinformation. Like, you look at what happened during Brexit. We're going to invest all this money into the NHS, we're going to invest everything into this, and we're going to fix everything. And then when Brexit rolls around, the money's gone, sorry. And then Lord Alan Sugar comes forth and says, if I were to lie in business, I would go to jail. So why are the people not going to jail within the government that have lied? There's an interesting thing, I think you'll like this, in Switzerland, parties and whether it's left, right, or middle, they have to upload their policies to a website in writing, and they all need to be checked prior to upload so that people know what they're voting for.
Yeah.
And I think that would be definitely a better way of doing things, because then you strip all the shite away. There's no misinformation. There's no he's going to do this and they're going to do this and I'm the best candidate. It's just, this is what we offer. This is what's going to happen. And I think that would probably be a better way of doing it than what's going on, because that would strip the misinformation away.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, with this election, whenever I would hear, oh, this party has this policy in their manifesto, I just didn't worry about it, because I thought, well, it's probably not going to happen anyway. They're not going to keep promises. Which is a really dire state of affairs, that you just expect politicians to lie. Nobody gets upset about it. But yeah, I really like that idea of actually making it, again, concrete and visible and accountable.
And if somebody lies, they are accountable. Like in business, we do, like, everyone will be accountable for a certain, area, right? That's how businesses work. So let's say I'm accountable for the website of the business, and I turn the website off. It's just gone. I'm then accountable for that, and I will be, handled as such. Whereas if you have politicians that aren't accountable to anything, nothing will get done, because nobody's measuring it. Like, why would they? Everyone, as we discussed previously, likes the easy thing. And if the easy thing is to do nothing, and by the way, be on a cushy salary, why would they do anything?
Yeah. And you run your own business, right?
No, I don't run my own business, but it's a family business I'm involved with.
Right. No, I just asked because like when you pay tax as well, you have to be honest and upfront with the government. But it's not a two-way street, it seems.
Yeah, well, you saw what happened with Nicola Sturgeon, embezzling money. Politics is just such a. This is why I try and steer clear of social media, because it infuriates me so much of, like, people are just filling their own agenda. And, like, it was very clear that Nicola Sturgeon wanted her name in a book trying to get Scotland to go independent. And if you actually look at the facts, most of our money comes from London. So, like, it's just, it frustrates me that the influence that people can have, I suppose, linking it back to the sort of the behavioural side of things, the influence that politicians can have and how effective it can be amongst the masses.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I've gone totally off topic.
I think her time is up, though.
Yeah. I think her time's up. The husband's been caught.
But politicians in general, I think, and institutions, there's this massive trust crisis, which will be painful for a few years, but I think we'll be better off for it eventually.
Yeah. I do think that if you got, and people don't like this idea, and I've said it before in a podcast, but if you got someone that's extremely successful in business to step into a politician's role, they potentially would do things in the right way, and they'd ruffle a lot of feathers, but they would get things done, and they'd get it done quick, and they wouldn't bullshit. Like, they just say it how it is. And I think that potentially that's an option. Like, get some uber successful businessman to step in, and then try and get the money back into the economy so that we're not paying as much tax, so that people want to live here, and also that they're being factual, because they know that they'll get punished if they don't be factual.
Well, I think that was the hope with Trump, but I'm not sure it worked out so well. But I would like Musk to kind of, I would like how Musk fired most of Twitter and it still works the same. I think we could do that with the government, surely.
Yeah. What's your opinion on AI, by the way, in terms of like data points, like AI collecting all our data from social media and then using that to, I don't want to say probably influence us through adverts and through marketing.
I don't think I mentioned in my bio, I used to be the lead psychologist at Cambridge Analytica, that company that did all that targeted advertising in politics. There was a bit of a scandal about it a good few years ago. So it's something I know quite well. I mean, it certainly happens. There are various ways it can happen. Maybe you just Google something and then that is used to target ads to you, or maybe it's probabilistic modeling where they can see from the websites you visit and certain information they have, they can see that you live in a certain area, you're a certain demographic, gender, age, whatever. You've just moved house, and so then they can predict the kind of things that you might want to see from that. And then I don't know if there's any evidence for this, but the idea that maybe your conversations are being recorded without knowing it, and that's being used to target you. I don't think there's any evidence for that. But what's really interesting to me, and actually what I do for work a lot, is personality targeted advertising. So it's not just about, if you Google books, you show someone an advert for a book, but actually you show them the advert in a way that they really like and that speaks their language. If they're extroverts, it would be a social image with bright colors and it would be more fun and upbeat. Whereas if they're introvert, it would be quieter with more text. So that's a really interesting area for me. And that can be hyper scaled using AI, which may or may not be a good thing, probably not, but you can create these personalized adverts immediately using generative AI now. So very interesting.
And are you what are your thoughts on the kind of again, from a more behavioral science point of view, this is a topic that I discussed. I actually got asked this question for a podcast Q&A. What are your thoughts on this is such an awkward one to even say. You see all these things that are coming out in terms of that have, they're AI orientated. I think that's really terrifying because it strips any humanity out of what you're doing, and then it allows the people that have a perhaps flawed perception of reality and are into really horrible stuff to bring that to fruition.
Yeah.
What are your kind of views on that? Because I feel like that'll disconnect people more than anything.
Yeah, absolutely. So every new technology in its early days was used for basically. So the printing press, there was the Bible, obviously, but there was also a book called Il Modo, it means the ways, which is kind of like a Kama Sutra, and that was one of the most popular books in the early days of the printing press. VCR, obviously, the internet, obviously. Everyone knows what people are using Apple Vision Pro headsets for. I mean, let's be honest. So, I mean, we have a natural desire to procreate. It's evolutionary. I guess it makes sense. But what's interesting is people think that how can I put this? You have sex with what you're attracted to, but you also become attracted to what you have sex with or who you have sex with. It's like conditioning, and psychologists have known for about 60 years that paraphilias can be conditioned, where if you show some men pictures of naked women, they get excited. If you show them naked women in boots, they get excited because there's naked women, and then take the naked women away and just show them boots, and they get excited because they've been conditioned to find the boots attractive. And so I think people fall into these spirals where they get more and more, go deeper and deeper into these kind of weird paraphilias because they're being conditioned. But also the medium is the message, wherein if you have a release while you're holding your smartphone, it's not just what's on the screen, but it's the screen itself. And so I think that's causing people to become kind of romantically attached to devices in a way. There's a lot of research on what's called nomophobia, where people just can't live without their phone. They feel attached to it as if it was a person. I think there is this kind of love people feel almost for their devices, which is, I think, fueled in no small part by, and of course, AI, robotics, just going to make it even worse, as you say, and disconnect people from the real.
Yeah, that's interesting because I'm just thinking of when, like, you know, I had a friend that his dad really sadly passed away, and I remember he came round. I saw him during the kind of passing, and he was wearing his dad's jumper, and it was
Mm.
like it's like an emotional connection, right? Because
Yeah.
his dad used to wear that jumper, and it's very different, but it's the same kind of process, right? Your brain's saying, I like that because in this instance with it's fun. I like that, it's exciting. So then you're attracted to that. So if what would happen then if you were sold to or you were advertised to, you know, things that you just shouldn't be advertised to? I feel like there's this perception in that industry where it's really aggressive, you know, quite like a violent, really, and that's kind of what people think it should be like because
Hmm.
they've been watching
Yeah.
what they've been watching. So, like, is that because they've been maybe conditioned to think that way?
Yeah, I think so as well. And there's what's called the hedonic treadmill that you're constantly looking for stronger and stronger hits. Um,
Hmm.
same with any kind of drug, really. You build up a tolerance, and yeah, people it is basic social norms. People accept what they see. Like I don't watch it myself, but you know, I'm only
Hmm.
human. I slip up now and then. And last time I did, there was some really weird stuff.
Yeah.
Just on the front page and in the banner ads. I'm like, well, is this normal now? Is this what people are looking at? Jesus.
People in
Um,
school.
right, yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's worrying, really, yeah.
Yeah, and that school kids are watching that kind of stuff, which is just, and that's they're being trained to think that way. I also think that, like, the idea and the concept of it's not too far away. Like, that is being produced right now. It
Mhm.
is
Yeah, yeah.
coming. It kind of like strips away a basic instinct because, like, your primal instinct, like one of your primal instincts is to get out and find a mate so that you can,
Mhm.
fall in love, procreate, and have kids.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful part of life. But if you have something within your grasp all the time that is customized to your kinks, so to speak,
Mhm.
that then stops you having the need or want to go and find somebody, where does that leave society? Because if that's widespread enough, like, we're already in a population crisis. If that's widespread enough, then surely people just won't really care about kids. They won't really want to because they've already got what they need.
Yeah. So there's a great theory called supernormal stimuli. So if you, I don't know if you know, but a cuckoo obviously will lay its egg in another bird's nest, and then the cuckoo's egg will hatch, and the chick has a much larger mouth than the other chicks usually in the nest,
Mm-hmm.
and the mother puts food into the biggest mouth, and so that big mouth is like hijacking a natural instinct that the mother has. And we're surrounded by these supernormal stimuli. McDonald's is a great example because it's packed full of sugar and salt and fats that you wouldn't normally find in nature. Um, I mean, all junk food is like that, of course. And so that then, real food can't really compete with that.
Mm.
You These caricatures of people that do are the same, like and all the lighting and everything else, making it look perfect. Or Instagram posts as well make it seem like people have perfect lives, so you feel that envy, like, oh, you need to go on a big holiday, and so real life can't compete with that supernormal stimulus. Um, so that's what it is. Absolutely, it's hijacking these instincts we have and serving them better than real life can, which can only be detrimental. As you said, the birth rate is collapsing, but also it's not really serving people's needs and drives in the long run. And I made this chart once where I got the birth rate in the US and I got the ownership of small dogs in the US. I found that data. And there's just like a almost perfect correlation. As the birth rate went down, the ownership of small dogs went up because people still have that need inside to kind of
Yeah.
parent, but it's just being manifesting in another way, which probably, no offense to dogs, I like dogs, but it's probably nowhere near as fulfilling as having a kid.
Yeah, well, you wouldn't think so, and it's scary that people think it is if they do,
Yeah.
because I think that I'm not sure about what you've thought. Obviously, you're a new, kind of relatively new father, but from what my parents have said and what other parents have said, it's like the most beautiful thing you can
Yeah,
ever
yeah.
do, and the fact that people are missing that out of choice. So sometimes not
Yeah.
out of choice. I'm maybe generalizing, but a lot of the time out of choice is really, really sad.
Yeah, I think it's tragic actually. I try not to think about it too much because it depresses me, but yeah, lots of people I know are choosing not to have kids. I think it's sad, very and kind of disastrous really for society.
Well, listen, Patrick, we
On that
fixed,
note,
yeah, we fixed the whole world in this podcast. Well, listen, where can people find you? First of all, you've obviously got 3 books. One of them you co-wrote, I believe.
2 books. Sorry, one of them is called Hooked, which is about marketing psychology. The other one, which I co-wrote with Laura Dodsworth, a journalist, is called Free Your Mind, and that's a Sunday Times bestseller. But yeah, if you want to learn more, please go to my website, patrickfagan.co.uk, where you can find my newsletter and my Substack.
Amazing, amazing.